Welcome to the Pier-Glass Poetry Panels. Today's focus is poetry and Christianity. I'm your host, and today's show looks at the role Christianity plays in poetry and its influence on today's poets. Thank you for joining in. Let's meet our first poet. Sofi Starnes, Virginia Poet Laureate 2012 to 2014, is the author of 6 poetry collections, most recently, The Consequence of Moonlight, Paraclete Press 2018. She is the recipient of a poetry fellowship from the Virginia Commission for the Arts, among other commendations, including the Rainer Maria Rilke Poetry Prize, the Ellen Anderson Prize from the Poetry Society of Virginia, the Aldrich Poetry Prize, the Marlborough Review Poetry Prize, 5 Pushcart Prize nominations, and an honorary Doctor of Letters degree from Union College, Kentucky. In 2012, she was selected as Galing Pinoy, Outstanding Filipino American, by the Los Angeles Asian Journal. Sofia's poetry has appeared in such journals as Poetry, the Bellevue Literary Review, Laurel Review, and Blackbird, as well as various anthologies, including the Best of the Decade edition of the Hawaii Pacific Review. Born in Manila of Philippine Spanish heritage, but coming to us today from Williamsburg, Virginia, welcome, Sofi Starnes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Thank you very much, Stan, and also Sistah Joy and Papa Jeff for being here and allowing me to share some of my poems and my faith with you. I will share 6 poems and to try to show how Christianity, is specifically Catholicism, is a presence in my poetry, a presence that has actually changed over 30 years because it starts being steeped very deeply in cultural heritage, but moves on to be beyond cultural borders to more essential quality about them. And I hope that will be clear in the poem. So I'll begin with an early poem that's called Shadows of Innocence. The setting of the poem is actually Williamsburg, because I've been living here in the spring, which is full of dogwoods and paper whites and white flowers. And this whiteness transported me to a memory of childhood in Manila, where I remember having a little prayer book which had white covers and little hearts that were clear. And it became obvious that if you failed or you were not faithful, the hearts would become stained. So there was a quality of whiteness and its precariousness. So here is Shadows of Innocence. Pure white, paper whites, odor of petals on the wicker stand on which we lean, death white, dogwood white, hybrid shadows behind the screened porch. We have been cautioned not to invade the white square of the house where the dead live. Why did you bring the bulbs indoors this year? Fresh spring whites are for old slabs with their prone angels. Remember the dotted hearts in our earliest missals, their venial lesson, the scent of onion skin? We learned from them never to flirt with the fragrance for the sake of our faithfulness. Blameless lily white, how it escapes us as white always does, with a merest gesture, a finger smudge on the slick envelope, a thin trickle on the swab where a nail ripped, velvet eyeshade against the tissue, a powdery death. Remember the white cassock our priest wore in summer heat, like a returning santo? It dropped its length on stubby feet into our muddy garden. Priests in the tropics wear white cassocks instead of black. And the word santo in Spanish means saint, but it also means in the Philippines, it refers to figures, wooden figures that were sculpted by Filipino artisans under the teachings of the Spanish missionaries and then by themselves. And they're really very beautiful. If you Google Filipino santos in eBay, you can find them, and they're quite expensive now, but they were in homes, in ruins of churches, and they're evocative because they have a story to tell, in which we often do not know. So this next poem is River Saint, and it imagines finding one of these santos along the river, and a santo that might be a martyr. He's wearing a Franciscan habit. We don't know. So this is River Saint. We cannot ask for a resting place or wish for an apse in a church. The martyr's eye, serene as stone, forgot to claim a grotto when we heaved and hauled this santo out of mud. We went half mad, the sight of it. Quick, santo, santo, pour your blessings on our banks. We saw, how strangely, that the flood had missed his crown, a smooth and solid bald spot bound to rock. We dipped our hands. With water we baptized. But the saint, unblessed and barren, fell from us, loosening purple algae and cold rust, his sacred mudskin petrified as an old Franciscan sack. He tilted right and farther, farthest inland, ghost on grass. Who knows why saints in mornings always rise, so dangerously dry? 30 years later, I still don't understand the last couplet, but it has a mystery that draws me. I know I wrote it, and I know it means something risky about being a saint, but that's how poetry speaks. Both of the poems I read have cultural heritage quite clear in them, but things start to change, and the next poem you'll see it. I'm asking myself about the universality of the faith that I have, and one of the questions is how the scriptural readings that came from the Middle East spoke so deeply to me in the Philippines as a child. I had, the images are not images that I knew. I never saw sheep. I never saw shepherds. They talk of castles or empires. It's just, and yet why were they so communicative? And I came to think of it as because it is God speaking through persons. The stories are personal, and personhood is something that we all share. We're all persons. So whatever is deeply personal is also deeply universal. And so I wrote this poem, Provinces, shortly after I learned that my father had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I start with biblical images, and the father of the image appears and then disappears, and then at the end appears again. So it's called Provinces. Imagine a province with nothing you have owned, shepherds and rucksacks, mustard and figs, fence posts and pastures, the valley of death. Picture cedars and slingshots, a pocket of beans, knotted sandals, further downhill the pink of a lamb no one seeks. In this story and in others they tell us of these, an inn and a portico, a temple, a dome, upheavals, the hazardous eyes of a boy close to swine, the hung jury of his father in drapery robes, the red ring he surrenders. And the stories have more of the unknown, a river that licks what is otherwise dry, the flap of a fishtail in stone, always food, always given. What is it that converts them to tales of our weeds, the brown chicory pulled from our drives, our blank corals? What holds things? Consolation, a garden, a hope? What returns blowing over the twilight gold pollen we bear to our tombs? Ache for angels. We have left a dark Plymouth still idling, our fog on its glass, a pure dent in the backrest, the little we owned of a father, a road, old communions. 7 times we will wash away grist from the slab, rub the name, clean sleeve over. 7 times we'll hear coming the bleat and the scuffle of lambkins. 7 times the custodian or the shepherd will wait for us, sign for us, one by one. Hija, my child, are you lost? Are you tarrying? So even with the words that are no longer from my cultural heritage, I had to end with that word hija, which is in Spanish because it means daughter. My father always called his 4 daughters daughter. It was easier than our name, so he would just say hija, hija. And so I had to put his that word in there. But poetry cannot survive in generality, so we drop words from a cultural heritage and we pick up the words of our daily life. Wherever we are. And hopefully in my poetry, I try to pick up words that are universal, words that anybody could connect to wherever they may be. I'd rather use the word river than the James River, for example. I guess in that sense, they're Catholic, as Catholic meaning universal. And so that's what I use for images. And one of the things that cultures everywhere have is renting. People rent houses or rent properties to other people. There are landlords and renters. So the image of God renting his creation to us was something that drew me. And so I wrote this next poem, which is from my last collection, and it's called God's Renter. And it's really a love song, a love poem between God and his renters, one particular renter in his home, in the house is given her, God's renter. Somewhere between a ghost and ghost relief, Between the gas lamp flickers and a stoop, a house behind the ragged thickets. Somewhere beside a kitchen and a hall, from chair to chair where travelers leave their cowls still damp after their countless vigils. She's come into a house that someone owns. She's made it hers, as through an acronym. Thinks of lost mail in a postal slot. Her gods, her quiet host, whose threshold hurts, is mending. He is quite happy, actually, to leave mortality and creation to this bride, to write her little notes about a dish, to send her flowers when the rent is due, redeemed. And of the neighborhood. They rarely hear of landladies and lords. They are all root, all home. They set their shoes precisely by their beds. They lean aboard their evening balconies. They mail their checks. O daily soul, who better breathes the wholesale of your room? Who best exhales your wishes? Christianity's central belief, I think we would all agree, is in God incarnate, a God who loves his creation so infinitely that he becomes one in his creation, validating everything that he's made, everything he's done as good, as being very good. And so we cannot deny that there is an enormous chasm between the infinite and the finite, but God continually speaks to us through his creation, and then farther from the farthest elements, the universe, the stars, closer and closer to our immediate experience, to our skin, to our hearts, to our wounds. And so this next poem, the second to last poem, which is called What We Know, is about those elements that God might use to speak to us until he becomes intimately one with us. What we know. The midday sun, the evening, and the moon, they're pocket change and silver in our hands. The late rose, that's the deep rouge of her cheek, and autumn speckled squash in market carts. And when we look above, Saturn spins the gold rings in our hands. Immediacy is a better kind of trust, as when we reach the blue endangered lake, its basin the equator of new life. How else to ponder here? What might we think when leaf and bird are featherbed and roost, no matter what we name the remnant geese? All this, the journey of a vast world through our ears, whispered as breeze and finishing as birth, while burrowed deep in scapula and throat. I know you well. I know you in this skin. For where is truth if not in wounds that heal, in wounds that hide your bracing crimson yield? And I will close with the last poem of a book, the title, the book, Full into Ashes. It's called A Way Through Words. We all know that words are limited. That's why we keep looking for the right word and then choosing another one. There's a reality beyond the words that is accessible to us maybe only through silence. But silence is something we might also fear. And so necessary, but something we fear. And so here's A Way Through Words. Now and in the hour. After this, a temporary silence. Come, let the air fall gently on our laps, as if a fleece uncurling, nothing else, as if a lamb we choose out of a herd, the sacramental. After our histories of speech, harangues in song and stammer, with notices alighting on the trees, lean back, umber and ancient on your chair, your trembling carriage. Of hopes, this is the most unbearable yet true, our hardest moment. After the tidying up of prayers, hard at the first amen against the last exhaling, we are asked to finger quietness, to flick the sediments of sound away, as one would sweep a desert. Ah, dry against dry, the dust lured into puffs, the mouth of nature. Strong is the tongue that tastes. Now and in the hour, our murmur, and we've left this temporary silence, voices racing to tell us what things are like. By rumoring, we raise the dead. Blessed be the word at stake, the universe of stars, articulate as childbirth. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Those were delightful and thoughtful poems that you shared with us. Let's look now to our second presenter for the day. Poppa Mac, the performing name of Jeff Mackay, bills himself as poet, preacher, and storyteller. He assures us that all his poetry and stories are 100% true except for the parts he has made up. He was born in Manitoba, Canada, and raised throughout Western Canada. Jeff was drawn to the cowboy lifestyle at an early age. His ranch and rodeo work have taken him all over Canada and the United States, with roles ranging from rodeo clown to wrangler to preacher. He is a 6-time Will Rogers Medallion Award winner for cowboy poetry, children's fiction, and cowboy cookbooks. Twice he has been nominated for the International Western Music Association's Cowboy Poetry Book of the Year. Both a pushcart nominee and the lead pastor of Fallen but Forgiven Cowboy Ministry, he comes to us today from his acreage in Grand Point, Manitoba. A big cowboy welcome to Poppa Mac.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored and blessed to be included in this panel. A little bit intimidated as I was hearing their introductions, as I don't talk about my education so much. I do have a degree in education, and I've studied in the seminary for my pastoral work. I'm contemplating going back and getting my master's in theology in evangelism, but that's beside the point. I'll be sharing some poems from 2 of my books. One is I wrote is 100% Christian cowboy poetry, and the other is a book that's very much out of my comfort zone. I was challenged by Dr. Stan when I was at the festival about writing a free verse book, and I did. I was pretty excited about it. It was very different for me. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to do it again, but anyhow. And then in the sense of cowboy poetry, we don't read our poems. We perform our poems. So I'm going to try. I have 3 from cowboy poetry, and I have 2 from the other book. So we're going to see how this works. The first one, I'm going to have my book here because I don't want to mess it up, but I'm going to try very hard not to have to use that book. The first one is called The Dusty Old Book. Well, there's a new cook on the trailer this year. I sure hope he's a good one. Last one was only here a month before he was set on the run. Well, somehow this one feels different. Nothing seems to make him mad, and the food's tasting pretty darn good, so it's not starting out so bad. He never joins in the card game. I've never seen him take a drink. He just sits and reads his book. He says it helps him to think. He asked if I'd read the Bible. I couldn't say that I had, but Mama used to read it, though, mostly when I was bad. And then one night he asked me to join as he began to read aloud. He wrote about how Jesus loves us, and he sat with his head bowed. Well, those words touched my heart like nothing had before, and tears fell from my eyes as I begged to hear more. And that's when I remembered that old book on the shelf. It's totally covered in dust. I've never opened it myself. It was a Bible given to me by Mom, and it was sitting there quite a while. It's funny how right now feels like the best time to take it down from the pile. And what I found inside changed my life forever. For I now live as a child of God, and I will forsake him never. Thank you. Now the second one I'm gonna share is another in the cowboy poetry genre. A friend of mine gave me the title of Pasture Pastor, because he said, well, that's where you preach most. You preach in pastures, you preach in arenas, you preach in barns. It's a big treat for me to preach where I have something over my head. And even more so, I'm not sure if I can wipe my boots off enough when I get to a church to preach in a church. So the pasture pastor. Well, the workday finally over and my belly is full of chow. My bed rolls at the ready. I'm craving sleep now. Well, he arrived as a shadow just as the sun set, a lone horse and rider both glistening in sweat. He sat in complete silence, his eyes adjusting to the light, while he was dressed all in black, as if looking for a fight. Well, he seemed strangely familiar, outlined by the flame, but he looked tired and worn, this man with no name. And then, speaking softly, he claimed he was called this way, for somebody needed to hear what he had to say. Well, he was a pasture pastor with God's love to share, He just followed where he was led to help those in despair. He spoke about God's love and how it could be ours, preached about forgiveness and salvation under the stars. Well, my life was changed forever that night around the fire as I surrendered it to Jesus with coyotes as my choir. And the third one, I went back and forth which poem I was going to share. I mean, you may have seen me frigid a little bit. I changed my poetry selection 3 times as I was listening to Miss Sophia, but I've gone back to one, and I'm going to show you a picture, and this just shows what inspired this poem. I think you can see the picture there. And so the poem is called Saved, and I don't know this one, so please forgive me. I thought I was ready to go. I didn't expect the gate to blow, and the force of the bull shook the ground. Eyes glowed blood red and acted like it wanted me dead. I was almost deafened by the sound. Well, I had trouble getting into my groove, but that bull matched every move as if it knew all of my tricks. This fight had become a major grind, and I found myself a step behind, and I got caught with one of its kicks. I was one scared clown as he had knocked me down, and the bull was coming in for the kill. In its eyes, I could see the sins of my past staring at me, and up my spine, I could feel a chill. And through battered eyes, I see a man's figure in front of me, and his hand turned that bull aside. Last thing I saw was the bull withdraw. Was this when I died? I awoke with a scream. It was only a dream. And I knocked a book off the nightstand. And what I saw was hard to ignore. It was my Bible on the floor, and it caught me completely offhand. It was open to Deuteronomy 31:6, and on what it said, I did transfix. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or tremble at them, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Well, it wasn't a dream after all. Jesus had saved me from that close call and will always be there to see me through. Well, then down on my knees, I began to pray, and I thanked Jesus for another day. Well, he had rescued me from my sins. So I will praise him even when life looks grim, to help ensure the devil never wins. And so now I'm going to go into this little book. This is the one that Dr. Stan made me. Well, he didn't make me write. He challenged me to write. And you know what? I do not regret it at all. So the first poem is called, Are You Sure You're Talking to Me? I know you tried to talk to me a number of times throughout my life. I wondered if it was you as I cleared the cobwebs after another night in the bottle. I pondered what you might say as I sat on my horse, staring at the harvest moon and stars. I hoped it was you as I brushed myself off after another meeting with an angry bull. I doubted it was you after losing my parents too soon. I thought it had to be you looking in my children's eyes for the first time. And I realized it was you this morning when I finally heard what you had to say. Well, we've been talking my entire life. I just didn't pay attention. Sometimes I didn't want to hear what you had to say, and other times I wouldn't have believed it anyway. Well, I may not have known why you've kept me around, but you have always known. It's never too late to talk when you're open to what is being said. And thank you for the conversation. I am forgiven. Now, that one, I had originally written that poem as a cowboy poem, and it was kind of autobiographic because I came back to Christ really hard in 1987. I was steamrolled by a bull in the middle of the arena, and everybody that saw it thought I had died. I could hear them. I was motionless. The bull had stomped on me. It had kicked me in the head, and I was lying there. But it's the only time in my life I audibly heard God said, "Get up, I've got this." And when I did get up, I had nothing. I had no bruises, no blood, no contusions, nothing. And so that kind of plays into it. I didn't know why he kept me alive, but he did. And so since then, I've been trying to live a little bit better life. So the last one I'm going to share with you, this is something I saw from the highway as I was traveling. And it was a church just sitting in the field. I hadn't gone up to it at the time. I hadn't done anything at the time. But I stopped at a rest stop not too far away from there, and I wrote a bunch of notes down about this church. And this is what came of it, called the church. The church stood abandoned in an overgrown field, its walls twisted and distressed from years of neglect. Pieces of the cross were strewn across the courtyard as if someone had used it as a javelin. Most stained glass windows were missing, more than likely decorating some picker's basement. Exterior walls leaned inward and stripped bare by the wind and sun. And hanging on the wall beside the main door was the announcement signed, displaying service times. Traditional at 9, and then again at 11. Appears 7 pews survived the looting, and to be honest, I can see why. We'll be singing hymns 132 and 485 with the message coming from the book of Romans 11:16. I was watching it being preached, would be interesting, as the ceiling had collapsed and had covered the pulpit in debris. Well, I found a few Bibles and hymnals sitting at the ready. Fragrances of musk leather wood and candles filled the space. Voices praising God's grace floated on the wind as it blew, and as it passed through, you could imagine the congregation sharing in fellowship. And when I picked up one of these Bibles, it literally came apart in my hands. I was left with only a handful of pages, but sitting right on top was Romans 11:6. The essence of the pastor's last message filled my soul, and if by grace it was no longer of works, otherwise grace is no longer grace. But if it is works, it is no longer grace, otherwise work is no longer work. And for some reason, as I was walking back the center aisle to leave, something compelled me to turn around. Where the pulpit once stood appeared a cross of shimmering light. It was as if the church was trying to get me to understand. I look for that cross, that church, every time I drive past to see if it's still there. And every time I see that it is. And I'm taken back to a time and day when that church shared its secret with me. The scariest part about this, I wrote down the hymns and the message and stuff as I sat at the rest stop. When I finally went to the church, one of the hymns was actually on the announcement, and the message was Romans 6. So coming from the cowboy world and the Western world, we depend on a higher power. We depend on God. When your whole life depends on nature, I find it very hard when I find somebody in this lifestyle who doesn't believe in a greater power. I love the fact that I am saved. I love the fact that my God loves me, even though I am a sinner. And I love the fact that you guys allowed me to participate in this and share what my faith has done with me. Thank you, and God bless you all.
We're so glad, Poppa Mac, that you took the time to be with us today. We've been blessed just listening to your story and your poetry. And we thank you for being an important part of this. Our final poet is Sistah Joy Alford, who is the inaugural Poet Laureate of Prince George's County, Maryland. She's the author of 3 books of poetry. She received the 2002 Poet Laureate Special Award from the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities for her outstanding contributions to poetry in her native Washington, D.C. She has served as president of the Ebenezer Poetry Ministry since 2003 and was named Poet Laureate of Ebenezer AME Church in 2016. She produces and hosts the award-winning TV show Sojourn with Words, which airs on CTV in Prince George's County and Montgomery County, Maryland, and more widely on YouTube and Zoom. She is an activist poet who founded Collective Voices, a poetry ensemble whose members present messages of social consciousness, inspiration, and empowerment. She has performed throughout the US and in the UK. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me for this exchange, for this panel that has been so very enjoyable and enlightening thus far. I am, well, I won't say overwhelmed, but just in awe of my fellow panelists. So thank you, each of you. I've certainly been writing poetry now for well over 35 years. I've come to poetry from a Christian background, and as such, well, I've experienced and been involved in many denominations. Currently, I'm AME. My faith has absolutely been a constant source of strength and direction in my life. My father was actually a Presbyterian minister from Birmingham, Alabama. So the connections that both bring one to ministry and the cultural richness of the African American experience are very much evident in my poetry, as I hope you will soon see. I am not a theologian, not even a minister. Well, with the exception that I have headed the poetry ministry of Ebenezer AME Church for 19 years. That has been something that I never anticipated, but it's been very richly rewarding. I have briefly studied just biblical beliefs at the Ebenezer Bible Institute connected with my church. And these are things that I believe have ushered me forward, but probably as much as my Christian faith also are my connections to the teachings and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which I can actually pinpoint as the beginnings of my awareness, my literary awareness as a poet at the tender age of 14. I don't have time to go into all of that, but I think you'll hear in my poetry the, well, what has been deposited into my writings and in my spirit. I'll first offer this poem titled, We Write Through Faith. With faith, family, and God as our guide, we write, praising and fighting our way, testifying through celebration and challenge as faith whispers in our ear. She is our foundation. Without her, we echo emptiness. But together, our words shout throughout the universe. Only through God's gracious gift can we write, proclaiming equally of triumph and loss. We dance or crawl across life's pages and stages, strangled by yet to be birthed victories and tragedies. Word warriors battling doubt and pain, we write, conquering faith-born trials again and again, we write. Poetry anchored in faith and tenacity opens doors, windows, and responsibility. We need her like air, for she resides inside the blue of our veins and rides the rhythm of our heartbeat. We sleep in the deep crevices of her mysteries, forever yearning, searching, unveiling. Each must answer her elusive call, for she is faithful to the faithful, commanding and demanding our all, taking our time, giving her words, teaching that she, poetry, is eternal, a lesson in faith, and only through God's grace can we write. So that piece is one that kind of explains my approach to writing, whether I'm writing spiritual or inspirational poetry or any poetry. This next poem is one that is quite autobiographical, as will be evidenced, and it tells my story. It's titled Searching for the Word. Searching for your word. Searching for your word, Lord. I walk through doors with no clue of how or where to find you, or where it is that you would have me to go. I read your word, hoping to see red seas part, hoping to quell flames of passion roaring inside my heart. Yet it is with these same flames that I seek the countenance of your face. Seek the spiritual oasis that is your grace. I try to control my feelings, yet my very nature seems to keep me reeling, keep me stealing moments when I delight in dancing on the edge. I yearn for discernment, seek the gift of wisdom, knowing that only through you can such true insight be found. I try to keep it real, yet seldom feel myself worthy of your light, let alone your love. I find myself in places too hot for humility, too cool for truth, yet you know, Lord, that I am seeking your light. Why is it that I so often find myself in a place not of grace, but of lusting after things that seem to mean I have so very far to go? Please, at least give me a sense of peace. Allow me to seek without feeling a need to hide behind the lame excuses I lift to myself and time again for the fallen moments hidden from human eyes, but not yours, Lord. Hidden even from my memory. Is it your grace that has given me the inability to recall at times even the poetry I write, keeping moments of indiscretion from my mind's eye? I thank you, Lord, for all that you have given me, for all with which you have entrusted me. For after all the clutter of broken and forgotten promises, after all the tears that sting and stain my face, pillow, and soul, after all of everything I try, I know it is your grace that lets me know that I can still come to you. You have taught me that just as you have brought me to and through this day, to this place, it is you who have given me the ability, the audacity to dare believe the incredible, to shout from the mountaintop about the power of your love. You, Lord, have taught me to at once beseech, exalt, fear, and revere the glory and power of your word. For your word has blessed me mightily and intimately. For your word has revealed who and whose I am. So that very much tells my story. Even though I wrote it over 20 years ago, the story hasn't changed. It is my story, and I am so ever grateful for that. This is a poem that I wrote. Oh gosh, you write a poem and you think you're writing it for someone else, and God laughs. So this is titled, I Pray for You, for my son. I pray for you that which cannot be given, but must be born within. That which pure prayer creates when love of God and self allows peace despite circumstance. When trust and faith empower beyond hesitation and fear. I pray for you possibility and promise, that together they ignite and claim their elusive prize, conquering demons of defeat that would bind and confine. I pray for you affirmation, validation of self, vision, purpose, and truth. Bathed in these anointed oils, no weapon can bring harm. Only then can you truly be free. I pray this for you and me. So sometimes, we have these reflective moments that speak about what we observe, and the observation is as we look about and make that connection internally. So this is simply titled Souls Seeking Light. With faith that flickers like fireflies in the night, we wander, float, a seemingly aimless reaching out, seeking to take more than give, survive rather than live, unaware of the beauty and brightness of our own light. Reflections are few when those around you only cast shadows that challenge, ridicule, and dim the radiance of right. We search for something more. He has already given us his all, gave us his word, so we'll know which way to go in dark nights and days when life's brightness blinds us. His word prepares us for this test called life. Lets us choose if, even when, but not how to pass the test. And sometimes you look for a different way to convey a message. This is one that I laughed when God told me, this is the path you'll take, but he never makes mistakes. It's titled Grandmama's Good Life. When I was a young girl down the island way, my grandmama, she look at me and say, how you gonna conquer the world with a drain in your brain and a hole in your soul? Then she laugh. She laugh and say, girl, go to school, learn, get smart. Don't be nobody's fool. Play fair. Work hard. And then she said, then show others how to. That's how you live the good life. Grandmama, she said, dare to care. Learn to share. Reach for the top in all you try and do. Learn to console your friends when they fail or lose, and learn to let them console you too. That's how you live the good life. Always, always respect yourself and your family. Be the brightest blossom, the strongest root, the richest seed on the family tree. That's how you live the good life. My grandmama, she said, earn your way to a better tomorrow, one that's brighter than today. Touch a life, right or wrong. Learn, she said, learn that gentle, oh yes, gentle is sometimes tougher than strong. She said, a warm smile opens doors faster than most keys, and that be true in life. I don't care where you be. Don't you want to be living the good life? Girl, she said, learn to trust. Above all else, that's a must. Drink and savor the sweet nectar of life. One day, she said, one day, be someone's partner or wife. Learn to love strong. Learn to love deep and strong. Learn that you can't go throughout life doing other people wrong. Fight fair for what you want. Forget the meaning of fear. Learn to work through your pain. Claim your victories, then step back and watch them appear. Now, this is when you know you be living that good life. This is what my grandmama told to me. She said, read your Bible each and every day. Give thanks to God, yes. Let Him show you the way. Take comfort in knowing He'll always be there and never get too old to fall down on your knees in prayer. Be thankful even for tests of today and tomorrow. Because without yesterday's test, tomorrow's testimonies can't follow. Now that's how you conquer the world and get rid of that drain in your brain and that hole in your soul. That, my child, is how you live the good life. And I'd like to close, if time permits, with a poem that it's one that I offer as a poem of empowerment. It's titled, Get Out of My Way. Would somebody please tell yesterday to get out of my way? Tell her to stop bulldozing my dreams, stop trampling my tomorrows and knocking me down every time I try to get ahead. Would somebody please tell yesterday to get on back to where hope be broken, choice be gone, so me and mine can stand a chance to rise above yesterday's can'ts. Now I know yesterday been around a long time. She probably figures she gonna be around forever. She done seen the new millennium come in. A lot of folks didn't, you know, because of yesterday. Yesterday took a lot of young folk. Of course, it took a lot of old folks too. Took my mama and daddy. Yesterday just keep on taking and taking folks in their dreams and their hopes. She take anything ain't locked down, I suppose. That's why I be real careful these days. Because you see, I'm tired of yesterday just showing up all over the place. You see, I've been working too hard trying to keep my stuff together, getting ready for tomorrow. For yesterday to just come up in here and take it all away. But when a body don't lock their stuff up tight, doing what's right, staying 2 steps ahead of yesterday with a stick in one hand and a Bible in the other, yesterday can sure enough knock you down. Keep your dreams from ever getting off the ground. Well, I say, yesterday done took enough. So I put locks on all my stuff. My soul be locked on Jesus. My heart be locked on my man. My children be locked in the cradle of my love with my 2 strong hands. Guiding them, show them the way, away from yesterday. My home be locked in the sacred shield, anointed with God's special blessing. Because you see, ain't nobody messing with something I work that hard for. My job be locked down with 30 plus years. Thank you, Lord, with me praying that I'll be moving in the right direction. Yeah, I got locks on all my stuff, and I'll be ready for tomorrow. So somebody, anybody, everybody, won't you please tell yesterday to stay out of my way? Because you see, it's time. It's time for tomorrow to let her light shine. And there's one thing for sure. Tomorrow's the one place yesterday can't go. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege. I hope you've enjoyed my poetry. I've absolutely enjoyed this experience. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Sistah Joy. We're going to move into some discussion just among each other here. And so if you have questions, go ahead and get those ready. But I was just thinking about something that you said in the preface to the next to last poem about how you never would have anticipated that route, that something would happen. And so I was just thinking about how I came to know the three of you, and how that with Sistah Joy, it was a matter of bumping shoulders, a handful of times over the last half dozen years at different poetry events. Poppa Mac walked into the campus where we had our festival, having driven his truck from Manitoba down to Virginia, and we became friends at that point when we shook hands. And I don't know if Sophia remembers, it was actually on an airplane to California that I ran into her. We were headed to the same place, and I had on a hat that she recognized. We were headed to a conference and struck up a friendship at that point. So yes, we can never anticipate, how the paths that we take might be foreordained and what will come of it. But those three very different paths have brought us all together today, and I'm grateful for that. I'm also very happy with the wide variety of poetry that we've had today, because I think that the role of Christianity in poetry is so very diverse. And each one of you has showed me in particular how that is filtered through our own personal experience. We have cultural moments, we have educational moments, we have family moments, and all of those come together to make us the poet that we are today, to give us the voice that we have, both literally and metaphorically, in the poems that we have. And I was just basking in the poetry as it came out today. And again, thank you all three for being our guests. The first question that I have is kind of a meta theater. When I asked you to be on this panel, how hard was it for you to pick the poems that you picked to present today?
Well, I'm happy to answer that because I literally went through several hundred poems. The reality of my serving as minister, head of the poetry ministry, there is a separate section that I have for church poems, but the messages tend to bleed over, whether it's inspiration and motivation and empowerment for my community activism, which is primarily what I'm known for, outside of my church, of course. But I found poems I'd forgotten. I found poems that brought to my attention that I need to share this poem more, because I tend to lean, especially now having been appointed poet laureate, I lean towards the social activism. But these poems that I shared today are very dear to me. They represent to the core who I am. And while I did not share any of my staunch activism, advocate, community empowerment poems, I think the latter, Get Out of My Way, kind of touches on that, because I want to convey to everyone that this is a path that is available to absolutely any person who chooses to lift their voice, because what is poetry if not lifting our voice? We do dance with words, and we select, oh my gosh, words that we change and we change and we change. We delete and we reorganize and we pull out the thesaurus and all of that. But, as is said, the Bible is the word. and the word is, whether you want to call it poetry, it's all ministry to me.
I didn't have it. I just wanted to make sure that there was a story, that if I started with one poem, and so it was natural to think of a poem that touched on my childhood, because one of the things that happens when you, I think for me, in my immigrant experience, I was born in Manila, immigrated to Spain, and then from Spain married an American, moved to the United States. So the one constant was this faith that no matter where I went, I could live. It had this universal quality about it. So I wanted to find poems that could trace that initial childhood, but then also how you arrive at a faith that it doesn't matter as much as whatever you have around you, God speaks, and the people you have around you, God speaks through them. So whether it's a dogwood in Virginia, or or sampaguita flowers in Manila, or carnations in Spain, He speaks to us. I do want to say, just I'll let Jeff answer, but I did want to say I love Westerns. I've always loved Westerns. I've always loved cowboys. And as a child in Manila, we would watch all this. And that was exotic for me. What is exotic for the West is Asia and all that. For me, what was exotic was Canada, or the big prairies and cowboys on horses, which I never have ridden. So if God will allow me in Spain in heaven to, if He lets me in and allows me, I'd like this pasture that Jeff or Poppa was talking about, and listen to him preach there. Anyhow,
There's all the best horses that have ever been will be waiting for us in heaven. We know that. And for me, when it came down to the poems, I use poetry a lot in my ministry, and it's a big part of my testimony. And as you saw, I changed my poems as we were sitting here, and part of it was because the ones I had, I thought were very strong, but then just through what was being said, I was led to do a different poem. So a lot of times I just let the Spirit kind of decide. Like when Stan, when you asked me to do that, I pray about everything, and I've learned that it's something that it just happens. And so when I was asked, I just asked God which poems I should do. He did lead me to a couple other bigger ones, and then He led me down to it. I think the dream one is very important, because I believe that we kind of live that way. Even when we're not dreaming, we kind of live that way. We think about something which we believe will be utopia, and then it's actually changed. I mean, the big thing that all my friends said, if you don't think God has a sense of humor, you tell Him what you have planned, and then you'll find out. Because I've actually even had the same thing that happened this morning. I've had when I was actually delivering a message. I was actually preaching, and on the way to the church, God changed. I had prepared for a week on my sermon, and God says, "No, you're speaking on this." And I had 5 minutes to decide. So I let God lead me to whatever He leads me to, how I write. And it's funny because I even get asked now in the cowboy world if I'm going to write any more cowboy poetry that isn't Christian. And I go, well, God has that plan too. I says, but you know what? When I start just writing down words, I have no way to know exactly where they're going. God leads to where they're going. I guess obviously I can write cowboy poetry. I've been pretty successful in that world, and I use this stuff for my ministry. So I said, for me, for the poems, I let God help me decide.
But go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, and when faith is such an important part of our lives, I think it is for all of us here. You don't sit down to write a Christian poem or a religious poem. It's just there. It's God is in you. You get up in the morning and offer Him the day, and you live that always open. So you don't sit down to write a Christian poem. It's just God is. If you have God in your heart, it'll come that way. By the way, I love the Grandmama. I mean, I like all your work, but the Grandmama poem, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful, and you read it so well.
Thank you. That was the one that I was literally trying to determine how was I going to convey this message that I had in my spirit, because I didn't want it to come across that I was hitting people over the head with the Bible. And I'm driving down the highway, and this island voice came to me. And I don't have an island grandmother. I absolutely never. And it just kept impressing upon me, to try this voice. And I had never done anything with an accent at all. And I just started this conversation with God saying, God, I know this isn't what you mean. I know I'm misunderstanding. I mean, I'm driving and saying, shaking my head and battling this, no, I can't do that. I can't. And it has become one of the most requested poems in all of what I present. And it's been years that I wrote it now, and it's still one of the most requested poems. So, God, he does have a sense of humor. Absolutely. And that is my testimony that I never would have imagined. So we do start thinking we're going to go in direction A, and God says, this is where you will go. Not where I want you to go. This is where you will go.
And I too love that poem and your presentation of it, and I think also about presentation of poems and how that preaching and delivery of poetry. You mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. How that those often weave themselves together. They're elements of the same thing, depending on what the message is.
Yes.
And so the Grandmama's poem, is the preaching, but it's also the poem. And the thing that I thought about was the delightful 2-syllable laugh that you put in there. And I go, how do I read that on the page? That's the literal part of me. When I'm going to read that poem, in a book, I don't know that I'm going to get that laugh just right. So I'm so glad that I was able to hear you present it, because now when I read it, I can just hear your voice when we do that.
But the reality of it is, when I have on the page, Grandmama, then she laugh and say, I don't have the laughter in there. I just know that's what seems right. So I give a very deep, rich laugh,
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a good point too, that when you said you don't have an island grandma, how poetry allows you, I always say the truth of a poem is its emotion, and in our case, it's the fate of its emotion. So you are free to bring in elements or put on a persona.
Absolutely.
And I have friends who are writing and ask me about, but I can't put that there because it didn't. Well, it doesn't matter that it wasn't exactly like that. You have to be honest and faithful to your emotion, to the inspiration that God is giving you. But you could use a red chair if it fits better than the blue one, whatever, or this kind of or an earthquake instead. So that's an interesting point.
And that's one of the things I try to convey, even as I'm instructing in my ministry, that we have to embrace truths that may not be literal, but they are truths. And it's just so necessary to understand that when God gives you something to work with, if you fight against it, you're fighting against
it's not gonna work.
It's going to be a losing battle.
Yeah, like Gamaliel said. Yeah.
Well, and I wonder how many of those are the poems that are still in files that we've never completed, because we just we had an idea in our head, and because that idea wasn't blooming, we couldn't hear the voice that was moving it in another direction. And so it sits incomplete.
And that's part of our faith walk as poets. That's absolutely a part of our faith walk, to go there when we feel that this is a message that God is encouraging us, is guiding us to offer. We just have to trust God. That's my biggest lesson. If because the reality of it is, before poetry, I was an introvert. I was the last person. I mean, I think back to my school years, I would never, ever raise my hand in class. I loved words and was always an English, fanatic, and straight A's and all of that. But the first time I was required to give an oral book report, I was petrified. And I remember this was middle school, and my teacher said, you have to do this. It's a course requirement. And I couldn't, and I didn't. And my grade suffered to the point of going from an A to an F. My parents did not understand at all. That was the last time. And I did not receive my faith at that point, but there was a lesson that was learned, and it has all built now. When I think back, to that shy, painfully shy child, and where God has brought me, because this is totally his journey, where God has brought me today. I know it could not have been possible without a higher power than than I.
I think
I
that,
have been in a
yeah, go ahead.
place where it has taken me 6.5 years to write a poem.
Yeah.
And like you had said, Stan, it went into a file. I'd look at it every once in a while, and nothing. And this was something very close to me. This was a poem actually about my father,
Mm.
and it was about my father's journey. And when I started writing it, I couldn't, because I think it was just still too hurtful. It was still too raw. I had just lost him. And yeah, about 6.5 years later, God led me and said, now you're strong enough now. You write that poem. And it's funny because in school, when I handed in a poem, it was maybe 2 verses and that was it. I didn't like reading. Uh, I would read like the day before the test. I didn't like writing. I've always kept notes, but I've always kept notes about, what's been going on around me. Of course, when you're ranching, you have to keep records. You have to do all that. And it wasn't until the prompting of a friend of mine who's a pretty renowned cowboy poet just says to me, why don't you just try to write it in rhyme? And I go, what's rhyme? What's meter? And, I try hard now. I mean, to be honest, last weekend when I couldn't make it, I was at a Christian retreat, but I was actually judging a poetry contest. And we had some of the best cowboy poets in North America at it. And you think competing is hard. Try to sit there and judge your peers. That's, I got my eyes closed. I'm counting with my fingers, rhyme and meter. And I just said, we're in a chapel. I just prayed. I says, God, just please help me, man. Guide me to do this. But so I understand about how it takes time. And for me, when I write, it just leads. And of course, in almost all my poems, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, they all have a country or a cowboy thing, because that's who I am. And even in some of my most powerful Christian ones, the first half is cowboy, and then is how it relates to us as Christians. And then it almost becomes somewhat preachy or sermony. But that's how I am. If people want fluff, don't come and hear me speak. I don't do fire and brimstone, but I tell you the truth. What it says in the Bible, that's the truth. I don't fluff it up. I don't blow smoke up people's rear ends. I guess that's the saying.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And I was thinking about in your bio when it says that everything you say is true except the made up parts. But that sounds a little bit like a comic gag, and then you realize actually that's true, because the metaphor of truth might exist where you've made something up.
Absolutely.
And that's the reason we make it up is for it's the power of the truth behind it. And so when Sophie said earlier something about the creation of the poem, we don't know where it's going. Actually, we've all said variations of that. I was thinking, even the poems that are not the Christian poems, they go through the same process. And, there's not really a distinction between a Christian poem and a non-Christian poem. Well, there could be in terms of content, but in terms of simply the power of creation, that's the book of Genesis. That's chapters 1 through 3. We are, in a sense, imitating God as we create these new worlds out of the words that He's given us to work with. So we can make it up and it can still be true.
I love that. Also, one of the things that I speak to when I'm doing workshops is the universe of the poem. And when you expand it or contract it for the purpose of your message, it's amazing that we are creators, and He gave us this gift for this, for this ability to do that. But the universe of the poem is something that it's very malleable, and we have to decide how and what will be included in that. And I mean, I think I happen to be a sci-fi buff, so when I'm looking at my Star Trek movies, the universe, you have to buy into it. But how do you get that buy-in, except that you create that universe? And that's what we do as poets. We create a universe.
And we have a very generous God who is not challenged by that. And on the contrary, he creates creatures who will co-create with him, who will participate in the making of his creation, in the beautifying of his creation, in the word, that he is the word. So I think that's always a point. When I was, we were talking about your father. When I learned that my father had terminal cancer and was going to die, I wrote a series of poems. But after he passed away, I grieved him before he died. I could not write about it anymore after he passed away. Of course, I was in the United States, he was in Spain, so I could write those poems because for me, in a way, he had passed away. I wasn't going to see him anymore. So I can understand that strong feeling. But many times in my poems, I step away, because the emotion is so strong that the metaphors become that other world that allows me to express my grief or whatever it is without being overwhelmed by the experience itself, by a retelling of the experience. So that's one way of doing of approaching the process of writing.
I actually wrote a poem. My wife and I were in southern Texas, and we got notification that her father had passed. And so we were a 37-hour drive from home.
Ooh.
And I drove 37 hours straight to get my wife home for her mother, nonstop. That's one of the, for whatever reason, I mean, you can ask Stan, I'll go from Winnipeg to Bridgewater, Virginia in 2 days. And it's like 16 hours the first day, 18 hours the second day. I just drive. I don't know why. But on the way home, my father-in-law gave me a poem. Like, he had already passed, but his spirit and God's spirit gave me a poem for my mother-in-law, and it's just called "I'm Still Here." And all it is just about the spirit. A lot. I wrote it. It was very personal. I just wrote it for her. I didn't think anybody else would ever hear it or ever do it. And then when my friend's mother passed, it just touched on my heart, saying, you know what, you have to give this poem to them. I was going to recite it at the funeral, but I was away doing something else, and I drove all night. I got to the funeral, but they had got their nephew to do the poem. So it's like, even there, like, God gave me the words. I don't take any credit. I don't take any credit for any of this stuff. It's God. But I mean, that especially, it was God and my father-in-law just telling my mother-in-law, I'm still here. Like, it's not. And I've done that a couple times. I don't write on commission, or just, my friend says, oh, I had writer's block. I couldn't write for 2 days. I'm going, yeah, I had writer's block. I couldn't write for 4.5 years, kind of thing. But also when a really good friend of mine's husband passed away, I was given a poem called It's Not Really Goodbye. And I wrote it for her, and I gave it to her because and nobody else, I haven't posted it anywhere. I don't know if I ever will. I mean, Susie will tell me. If she believes that I can post it, then I'll post it someplace. But I wrote it, and I don't know why. I mean, I knew her husband. I thought he was a wonderful, wonderful man. I didn't know him well. I didn't know him anywhere near as well as I knew his wife, because she's a renowned, award-winning cowboy poet. But it was just given to me, and it said I had no choice. It wasn't like, yes, you might do this. It was like you had said, Sistah Joy, you will do this. And so what I do, I did it. There you go. What could I do?
Well, I know I've written many poems. My mother passed when I was a very young girl, and I've written many poems lamenting her absence in my life. I literally have no recollection of her, not even her face, and there's no family photos. And it's been something that I feel that I've rewritten this poem 20 times in different poems. And I have hopes that I still may yet find the photo beyond what I was blessed to receive, the stamp size black and white photo from her high school yearbook that when I had it enlarged, it got so grainy that, but I cherish even that. But these are, losses are something that are impressed upon your soul, and you have to find what you're supposed to do with it. Every time I write something, I feel a satisfaction in the poem, but I know when I find myself writing again on that absence. As a matter of fact, the last poem I wrote about her is titled Absence. It's telling me that I'm not finished with this yet. So.
And I think all of us are never finished, with the writing that we do. It is a calling that comes through us, not just because of us. And we have had a very rich conversation today, and I want to thank Sophia and Poppa Mac and Sistah Joy for being our participants today. It has been very rewarding. And so for Pier-Glass Poetry Panels, I'm Stan Galloway. Hope that you enjoy the poetry of today's panel, but also enjoy the poetry of your world.